How I finally got my sweet revenge against my golden child sister. Reddit family story. Welcome to Silent Wars. In today's Reddit family story, we dive into the intense world of sibling rivalry, family favoritism, and the sweet taste of revenge. The protagonist has endured years of being overshadowed by their golden child sister, facing emotional turmoil and unfair treatment. But when it comes time for their wedding day, they finally decide to stand up for themselves. Get ready for a shocking turn of events that will leave you captivated. If you enjoy stories that reveal the complex dynamics of family relationships, don't forget to like and subscribe to Silent Wars for more exciting Reddit family tales. Growing up in a seemingly typical suburban family, I was no stranger to feeling overshadowed by my older sister, Kate. As the so-called golden child, she was the center of attention, and for as long as I could remember, our household revolved around her needs, her successes, and her desires. From an early age, it became painfully obvious that she was favored above all else. Despite my own accomplishments, no matter how significant, it always felt like they paled in comparison to whatever Kate was doing at the time. The first major sign of the favoritism I would endure was when I was a child. I distinctly remember my 10th birthday when my parents, who had been preparing for Kate's college interviews, completely forgot about mine. There was no cake, no party, nothing. Instead, they offered me Kate's leftover graduation cake still with her name on it and called it good enough. At that point, I realized that my life, my achievements, and even my very existence seemed to matter less than Kate's. For them, everything was about her. As we got older, the favoritism only became more pronounced. Kate always had the newest toys, the best clothes, and the lion's share of attention. When I managed to save up my allowance for months to buy a new bike at 10 years old, my parents, instead of celebrating my hard work, immediately bought Kate an even better one after she threw a tantrum over not getting the same gift. Her complaints were always heard, while mine fell on deaf ears. It felt like everything I did was either ignored or dismissed. In school, the disparities were just as evident. I joined clubs, participated in activities, and earned good grades, but none of it ever seemed to matter. When I won a local painting competition, my parents barely acknowledged it. Instead, they celebrated Kate's achievements with extravagant praise. And when she had a minor success, like getting a B+ on a test, they threw her a party and bought her a new phone. I remember feeling like I was invisible in my own family, constantly working to prove my worth but never quite measuring up to her. As time went on, I learned to live in the shadows of Kate's accomplishments. Whenever I tried to speak about my achievements or ask for a little recognition, my parents would brush me off and instead direct the conversation back to Kate. It became clear that no matter how hard I worked, no matter what I did, I would always be in her shadow. Even when I managed to earn a scholarship for college, my parents' reaction was lukewarm at best, while Kate, despite her less than stellar grades, received full support to pursue her dreams. Things got even worse during Kate's wedding. After years of being treated as secondary, I was pushed further into the background. Not only was I tasked with organizing and coordinating everything for her wedding from the bridal shower to the bachelorette party, but I was expected to carry out all these duties without complaint, even though it caused me immense stress. When I dared to express my frustration, I was met with the accusation that I was being selfish and not supportive. It was clear that my entire existence was merely to serve Kate's needs and desires. The worst part came when Kate had children. The favoritism didn't just stop with her. It extended to my nieces, and once again, I found myself in a supporting role. My parents expected me to be the reliable aunt, always there to babysit and take care of Kate's kids. Despite my own responsibilities and personal life, I was always expected to drop everything to care for them. It was as if my own time didn't matter, as long as Kate was happy and her children were taken care of. My own plans and dreams were constantly put on hold, and I felt increasingly isolated and trapped in a life where my needs and desires were never considered. By the time I was an adult, the emotional toll had started to weigh heavily on me. I was a people pleaser, always trying to make everyone happy at the expense of my own well-being. I had learned to live in the shadow of Kate's successes, constantly feeling unworthy and invisible. But the breaking point came when I finally realized that I had spent my entire life giving and sacrificing for a family that would never value me the way they valued Kate. I had done everything for them, and yet it was never enough. It took years of emotional turmoil, a deep sense of resentment, and countless sleepless nights before I finally decided to put myself first. And when I did, I realized that my worth was not tied to how my family treated me. I was worthy of love, respect, and happiness just as much as Kate, and I vowed never again to let anyone make me feel less than. This journey of self-discovery would ultimately lead me to reclaim my life and happiness, and though it was painful, it was the best decision I ever made. For as long as I can remember, my family has been dysfunctional, with my sister Kate being the golden child. Growing up in a seemingly typical suburban home, I had to endure years of favoritism and neglect. It felt as though my whole life was spent in her shadow, with my accomplishments and needs constantly disregarded in favor of hers. The emotional toll of being the second-best child in my parents' eyes was something I didn't realize would shape so much of my life until much later. The favoritism started early. Kate was the miracle child, the one my parents had desperately wanted and hoped for. In contrast, I was the unplanned child, the one they had no real expectations for. The difference in their treatment of us became apparent even at a young age. My birthday, for example, was always an afterthought. While Kate's milestones and events were celebrated with grandeur, my celebrations were minimal. I still remember the year I turned 10. Kate had a huge party, complete with all her friends, elaborate decorations, and special gifts. As for me, I was given a store-bought cake, and my parents barely acknowledged it. It set the tone for the rest of my childhood. As I grew older, the favoritism only became more evident. Whenever Kate did something wrong, my parents would rush to her defense. They would believe her stories without question and punish me, even when I had undeniable proof that she was lying. On the rare occasion that I made a mistake, my punishment would always be harsher than hers. If I tried to speak up, my parents would dismiss me, claiming that I was being unreasonable or envious. This constant imbalance created a deep sense of resentment and frustration in me. Kate, on the other hand, was spoiled in every way. She had the best clothes, the newest toys, and the most attention from my parents. I remember how I would save my allowance for months to buy a new bike, only for Kate to throw a fit and get an even nicer one. She was never required to earn anything. All she had to do was ask, and my parents would deliver. Meanwhile, I was expected to work hard for anything I wanted, and even then it was often denied. My parents would justify their behavior by saying she was older and needed more support. But as I grew older, it became clear that this was just an excuse to continue their biased treatment. In school, things didn't get any better. I was a dedicated student, always striving to do my best. I worked hard to maintain good grades and was active in extracurricular activities. But despite my efforts, my achievements were often overshadowed by Kate's. When I won a regional science fair or earned a high GPA, my parents barely noticed. They would praise Kate for her minor accomplishments, like getting a B+ on a test, while completely ignoring my hard work. When I received acceptance into a prestigious summer program at Harvard, my parents were less enthusiastic than when Kate had some small achievement. It felt as though nothing I did was ever enough. The situation only worsened as we entered high school and beyond. Kate received all the praise and attention, while I was left to fend for myself. She had no interest in building meaningful relationships, and relied entirely on my parents for emotional and financial support. Meanwhile, I worked 2 part-time jobs throughout high school and college to make ends meet, constantly feeling like I had to prove myself just to be seen as worthy. When Kate married, my parents took out a loan to pay for her extravagant wedding, while they barely acknowledged my own graduation. And when Kate had children, it was no surprise that my parents showered her kids with attention while I was expected to act as the reliable aunt, dropping everything to babysit whenever they asked. But the real turning point came when I decided to stand up for myself. For years, I had been the dependable sister, the one who always put the family first, even at the expense of my own happiness. I constantly sacrificed my own needs to cater to Kate's demands, but the emotional toll it took on me was becoming unbearable. My relationship with my parents became more strained, and the resentment built up over the years was starting to affect my mental health. It was during this time that I finally realized that I had to put myself first. My parents and sister had always taken me for granted, assuming I would always be there to cater to their needs. But I was tired of being the family's fallback option, the one who always did the hard work without ever receiving any acknowledgement or respect. I knew I had to make a change. The opportunity came when I decided to plan my wedding. My fiancé and I had always talked about a simple, intimate ceremony, and that's what I wanted. But once again, my family tried to hijack my plans. My parents insisted that Kate should walk down the aisle first, as it was her turn to experience the wedding spotlight. They even suggested that they would pay for my wedding, but only if Kate was given this honor. This was the moment I realized I couldn't let them continue to dictate my life. It was time for me to take control. With the help of my husband, I devised a plan to make sure my wedding would be about me. We pretended to go along with my parents' idea, all the while secretly planning to keep Kate out of the ceremony. On the day of the wedding, my parents were shocked to see me walk down the aisle alone. My sister, who had been so sure that she would walk first, was turned away by security. The look of disbelief on their faces was priceless. They had tried to ruin my day for years, but this time I got my sweet revenge. The aftermath was messy, of course. My family tried to call and message me, accusing me of ruining their lives and causing drama. But I stood firm. I was finally able to break free from the emotional hold they had on me. I had spent so many years feeling unworthy, constantly seeking their approval. But in the end, I realized that my worth was not tied to their recognition. I had finally taken control of my life, and I couldn't let anyone take that away from me. In the months that followed, I slowly rebuilt my relationship with my parents, but it would never be the same. The dynamic had shifted, and I was no longer the person they could manipulate. It wasn't easy, but I was finally living life on my own terms. I had my wedding, my marriage, and my own happiness, and no one could take that away from me. Growing up in a family where favoritism was the rule rather than the exception, I have spent much of my life feeling like I was invisible. My older sister, Kate, was always the golden child, the one who could do no wrong. It wasn't just a case of my parents favoring her. It was as though I didn't even exist unless my achievements could somehow reflect positively on her. Kate's every need was met with fanfare, while my needs were constantly overlooked, and it was something I learned to accept, or so I thought. But as I got older, the unfairness grew more difficult to ignore, and I realized that I couldn't continue living my life as a silent bystander. The real turning point came when my wedding day approached, and for once, I refused to let my family's toxic dynamics ruin something that was supposed to be for me. From the start, my sister's presence in the family was like a shadow that I could never escape. Kate was the child my parents always dreamed of, the one who had their full attention and support. I was the afterthought, the one who seemed to always be in the background. While my parents poured their love into Kate's achievements, I was left to fend for myself. My grades, accomplishments, and milestones were rarely celebrated, and if they were quickly overshadowed by whatever Kate was doing at the time. I can still remember how, when I won a regional art competition in high school, my parents barely noticed. But when Kate scored a B+ on a test, there was an entire family celebration. This favoritism continued into adulthood, and it was clear that I was never going to be enough for them. Kate, in her turn, was spoiled in every way imaginable. Whether it was the car my parents bought her for college or the endless praise she received for doing the bare minimum, she always had it easy. Meanwhile, I had to work 2 part-time jobs just to make ends meet during college, and even then I was told it wasn't enough. My parents would lecture me about how my life should be like Kate's, that if I were more like her, things would be different. I learned quickly that if I ever tried to voice my dissatisfaction, I was either dismissed or punished, and my parents would always side with Kate. Over the years, I had become used to being the family's scapegoat, the one who could never do enough to earn their love or respect. I lived for their approval, even though I knew deep down I would never get it. But everything changed when I got engaged. I was finally planning a wedding, an event that should have been about me and my future. However, as the date approached, it became increasingly clear that my parents and sister were once again determined to hijack it for their own purposes. They insisted that Kate should be the one to walk down the aisle first in a wedding dress, so that she could have the experience she never had. They claimed it was only fair, as I was the younger sister, and they couldn't bear to see me marry before Kate. Their audacity was astounding, but at the time I was still too meek to confront them head-on. That was when my husband stepped in. He was fed up with the way I had been treated all my life, and he refused to let my family make a mockery of our special day. He knew this was a pivotal moment for me, one that could set the tone for the rest of my life. So he took matters into his own hands. He secretly recorded a conversation with my parents, where they explicitly stated that they were willing to pay for the wedding, only if Kate was given the spotlight. It was the last straw. My husband and I knew we had to put an end to this cycle of manipulation and favoritism. We devised a plan that would allow my wedding to be about me, not about Kate's insecurities or my parents' need to control everything. We pretended to go along with my parents' demands, all the while making arrangements to ensure that Kate would never make it down the aisle. We hired security, arranged for a bodyguard to stop Kate from entering the venue, and carefully orchestrated every detail to make sure the day went according to our wishes. When the time came, my parents were shocked to see me walking down the aisle alone. Kate, who had expected to steal the show, was turned away by security, and my parents' faces were filled with disbelief. The aftermath of the wedding was as dramatic as I had imagined. My parents and sister tried to contact me, accusing me of ruining the family and causing irreparable damage. But this time I didn't care. For the first time in my life, I had done something for myself. I had taken control, and I wasn't going to let them manipulate me any longer. My husband and I continued to enjoy our wedding day, knowing that we had taken a stand. In the weeks that followed, my family tried to reach out, but I refused to engage with them. I had finally learned to set boundaries to stop sacrificing my happiness for their approval. They had tried to control every aspect of my life for so long, but I was done playing by their rules. The emotional toll it had taken on me over the years was immense, but now I was free. I had my own life, my own happiness, and my own identity. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I was enough. Growing up in a family where my sister was always the golden child, I never imagined the extent to which her favoritism would affect my life, and it became an obstacle I had to learn to overcome. My older sister, Kate, was my parents' pride and joy, and I, well, was nothing more than an afterthought. It wasn't something I could escape, and for years I thought it was normal to play the role of the second-best child. But as I got older, the unfairness became more evident, and I found myself fighting for attention, validation, and love that never seemed to come. Kate had always been treated as the perfect child. She was given every opportunity, every resource, and every ounce of support from our parents. From an early age, she was the one receiving praise and gifts, while I was left to figure things out for myself. I remember my childhood birthday parties clearly. Kate's were elaborate affairs with expensive gifts and every detail carefully planned, while my own parties were bare minimum, often with a store-bought cake that couldn't hold a candle to her extravagant celebrations. The difference in how we were treated was stark, and it was something that became painfully apparent as we grew older. My parents invested heavily in Kate's future tuition, extracurricular activities, and even a car for her once she reached college. Meanwhile, I was expected to fend for myself. They paid for her entire college education, but when it came to mine, they told me I was on my own. My sister never had to worry about money while I worked multiple jobs just to get by. Yet, despite all my efforts and achievements, my parents could barely spare a kind word. I knew that no matter how much I accomplished, it would never be enough. The worst part was how this favoritism extended to the way they treated me when it came to relationships. As a teenager, I was starting to develop crushes, but my parents' reaction to my budding romantic life was always one of suspicion. When I tried to bring a boyfriend home, my sister would swoop in like a hawk, making sly remarks about how I wasn't good enough for him, or how she could do better. My parents, ever the enforcers of her narrative, would always believe her, even when I had done nothing wrong. She could accuse me of flirting with her boyfriends, and they would immediately take her side, punishing me for things that weren't true. This toxic environment left me feeling isolated and alone. I didn't have many friends, and even the ones I did have weren't allowed to spend time with me because my sister didn't like them. I remember the frustration of asking to go out with friends only to be met with excuses that they weren't good enough, or weren't the kind of people my parents wanted me to associate with. This made me question my worth. If I couldn't even have my own friends, how could I possibly succeed in other areas of life? However, despite the emotional toll this took on me, I somehow managed to succeed. I excelled in school and went on to college, even though my parents barely acknowledged my accomplishments. I received a scholarship, but I knew that, just like everything else, my achievement would never be celebrated in the way my sisters were. I was always second best, and that feeling of being overlooked stayed with me. But I was determined to build my own life, one that didn't rely on the approval of my parents. The turning point came when I got engaged. I had always dreamed of a wedding that would be special to me, but when I shared the news with my parents, they immediately began planning for Kate to take center stage. They insisted that my sister should walk down the aisle first in a wedding dress so she could experience it before me. Their logic was simple. Since I was the younger sister, it was only fair for Kate to have the moment she never got to have. I was furious, but I had grown used to letting my feelings slide under the surface. I didn't want to make waves, but this time I knew I couldn't let it slide. My husband, however, was having none of it. He had seen the way my family treated me over the years and knew that this wedding, which was supposed to be one of the happiest days of my life, was about to be ruined by their selfishness. So he took action. He secretly recorded conversations with my parents, where they clearly stated that they would only pay for my wedding if Kate was given the spotlight. This was the tipping point for me. My husband and I had a plan and we were going to execute it. We decided to play along with my parents' wishes, pretending to agree to their demands, all the while making sure that Kate would never be able to walk down the aisle. We hired security for the venue, and we carefully orchestrated every detail to make sure the day went according to our plan, not theirs. When the day finally arrived, my parents were blindsided. They had expected Kate to steal the show, but instead I walked down the aisle alone, and Kate was turned away by security. The aftermath was exactly what I had expected: chaos. My parents tried to contact me, sending desperate messages and accusing me of ruining the family. But this time I didn't care. I had taken control of my own life, and for the first time I felt powerful. I had stood up for myself, and I wasn't going to let them manipulate me anymore. My wedding day was mine, and no one, not even my family, was going to take that away from me. Growing up, I never really understood why I was always treated differently from my sister. She was the golden child, always praised, always in the spotlight, while I remained in the shadows, constantly overshadowed by her achievements. As a child, I didn't know how to express the frustration that came with being the second best. But as I grew older, I began to understand the dynamics of our family, and that understanding only made the situation more painful. My sister, Kate, had always been the one to receive all the attention. From the moment she was born, she was considered the miracle child. After years of trying for a baby, my parents were overjoyed when she arrived. She was everything they had hoped for, and I was just an afterthought. I came along only a year after Kate, and my parents never quite adjusted to the fact that they had another child so soon. In many ways, I was treated as if I had been a mistake. Their attention was always focused on Kate, her accomplishments, her needs, her desires, and I was simply expected to fall in line. Growing up, I learned quickly that if I wanted anything, whether it was a new toy, a special treat, or even some affection, I would have to fight for it. It was always Kate who got the best of everything. She got new clothes every season, while I made do with her hand-me-downs. She got the latest technology while I was stuck with outdated devices. And of course, when it came to school, Kate's grades were celebrated with praise and gifts, while mine were simply ignored. My parents would often brag about Kate's achievements, whether it was her perfect grades, her success in extracurricular activities, or her social life. In contrast, any success I had was quickly brushed aside. When I won a local painting competition, they barely acknowledged it. When I received straight A's, it was no big deal. But when Kate managed to get a B+ in a subject she struggled with, they threw her a party. I remember asking them once why they didn't celebrate my achievements the same way, but my question was met with a vague response about how Kate's success was harder to come by, or she's the firstborn after all. I couldn't help but feel the weight of this favoritism as I entered high school. I joined clubs, worked hard to get good grades, and even earned a scholarship for college. Yet none of it seemed to matter. My parents couldn't be bothered to show any real excitement about my accomplishments. Meanwhile, Kate coasted through high school with minimal effort, and yet every little thing she did was treated like a huge triumph. I felt invisible, and it began to take a toll on my self-esteem. The way my parents treated me was bad enough, but things got even worse when it came to relationships. I remember the first time I had a boyfriend. I was nervous about bringing him home because I knew how my parents would react. Sure enough, when he came over, my sister decided to put on a show. She flirted with him right in front of me, batting her eyelashes and acting like I wasn't even there. When I confronted her about it, she denied everything and told my parents that I was being paranoid. As always, they sided with her and accused me of overreacting. It was as if nothing I did could ever be good enough, and nothing I said could ever be trusted. As time went on, I started to accept that my relationship with my parents was never going to change. They would always favor Kate, and I would always be the second best. But I had one thing that Kate didn't. I had my independence. I worked hard to get into college, and when I finally graduated, I had a job lined up. I had my own life, my own friends, and my own goals. And for the first time, I felt free from the weight of my family's expectations. Then came my wedding day, and everything changed. I had always dreamed of a small, intimate wedding, just the way I wanted it. But when I told my parents about it, they immediately started taking control. They demanded that Kate be the one to walk down the aisle first. They claimed it was only fair since she was older, and had never had a wedding of her own. They insisted that I let her have the moment, even though it was supposed to be my special day. At first I tried to appease them, but as the day approached I realized I couldn't let them ruin my wedding too. I turned to my husband for support, and together we came up with a plan. We decided that if my parents were going to take control of my wedding, we would take control back. We hired security to make sure Kate wouldn't be allowed to walk down the aisle. And when the day finally arrived, it played out exactly as we had planned. My parents were shocked when they realized what was happening. They tried to control the situation, but it was too late. Kate was denied entry, and my wedding went on without any more interference from them. For the first time in my life, I stood up for myself. I refused to let my parents and sister ruin what was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. It wasn't just about the wedding, it was about reclaiming my life from the years of favoritism, neglect, and mistreatment. And in that moment, I realized that I didn't need their approval to be happy. I had finally broken free from the chains that had held me back for so long. Growing up, my life was never really my own. It was as though everything I did, every success I achieved, was overshadowed by my older sister Kate. She was the golden child, the one who could do no wrong, while I was constantly left in her shadow, trying to meet expectations that seemed impossible to fulfill. It wasn't that I was a bad kid. I worked hard, I was diligent, and I strived for success, but no matter what I did, it always felt like it was never enough. My parents' attention, affection, and approval were all focused on Kate, and I was left to fend for myself. From an early age, I learned that Kate was the center of our family's universe. Every birthday, every celebration, every accomplishment, everything revolved around her. I remember my own 10th birthday vividly. While Kate was treated to a lavish celebration with professional face painters and a petting zoo, I had a store-bought cake and a quiet family dinner. That moment, as small as it seemed, set the tone for the rest of my childhood. No matter how hard I worked, no matter how much I achieved, Kate's needs were always prioritized over mine. As we grew older, the favoritism only became more apparent. When I earned good grades, no one seemed to care. My parents would hardly acknowledge my accomplishments. But when Kate received a B+ in a subject she struggled with, it was a celebration. They'd throw her a party and buy her gifts as if she just won a major competition. I started to feel invisible, like my achievements didn't matter, and my self-esteem took a hit. My parents' praise and encouragement were always reserved for her, while I was expected to silently accept the scraps. It wasn't just about academics, it was about everything. When I joined clubs, worked hard, and achieved success, I was met with indifference. But when Kate did something as simple as show up to a social event, it was treated like a major milestone. Her life was constantly praised, while mine was disregarded. My parents never gave me the same validation that they so eagerly gave to Kate. I was expected to be content with whatever scraps they threw my way, and I was made to feel guilty for even asking for more. The worst part of it all was the way my sister treated me. At first, it was subtle. She'd ignore me, act like I didn't exist. But as we got older, her behavior became more aggressive. She began accusing me of things, from stealing her clothes to lying about things that never even happened. My parents always believed her, no matter how much proof I had to the contrary. When I tried to stand up for myself, they would just tell me to be quiet, accusing me of making things up. And when Kate needed something, she didn't ask, she demanded. My parents always complied, as if her needs were more important than mine. It was as though I had no voice in my own home. As a teenager, things only got worse. Kate's friends would bully me, and my parents would brush it off, calling it light teasing. I stopped inviting my friends over because I knew they'd be treated poorly by my family. And when I finally had a boyfriend, the situation got even worse. My sister tried to flirt with him, and when he rejected her advances, she accused him of flirting with her. Once again, my parents sided with her, believing her over me. I was left feeling humiliated, unable to defend myself in my own home. When it came time for me to go to college, things didn't improve. My sister was given everything she needed for her education, while I was told to figure things out on my own. I was expected to pay for my college tuition, despite the fact that my parents had paid for Kate's entire education. I worked 2 part-time jobs to make ends meet, barely able to keep up with my studies. My sister, on the other hand, was given a free ride. When she finally graduated, it was met with grand fanfare, while my own achievements were met with indifference. And then my wedding day arrived. After years of feeling overshadowed by Kate, I had hoped for a quiet, intimate ceremony where I could finally experience some joy for myself. But once again, my parents tried to take control. They insisted that Kate walk down the aisle before me, claiming it was only fair since she was the older sister. They said it was a tradition even though it was my wedding day. It was the final straw. I had spent my entire life giving up my own happiness for the sake of my family, and now they wanted to ruin my wedding too. But this time I decided to stand up for myself. I didn't let them walk all over me again. With my husband's help, we came up with a plan to ensure that my wedding would be about me, not Kate. We hired security to prevent Kate from walking down the aisle. When the day arrived, my parents were shocked when they realized what had happened. They tried to intervene, but it was too late. Kate was left outside, and my wedding went on without any more interference from them. For the first time in my life, I took control of my own happiness. I didn't let my parents or my sister ruin it. That moment was not just about the wedding, it was about reclaiming my life. I realized that I didn't need their approval to be happy. I was finally free from the years of favoritism, neglect, and mistreatment. And for the first time, I felt valued. Growing up in a household where favoritism was the norm, I found myself constantly fighting for attention that was never mine to begin with. My older sister, Kate, was always the golden child, the one who could do no wrong in my parents' eyes. It wasn't just about the typical sibling rivalry that many experience growing up. It was something far more insidious. The constant comparison, the lack of acknowledgement for anything I did, and the perpetual feeling of being second best took a toll on me that lasted well into adulthood. It began at an early age. I can still remember my 10th birthday, the one that will forever be etched in my mind as a symbol of my life in the shadows of my sisters. Kate had an extravagant celebration complete with a petting zoo, face painters, and a bouncy castle. Meanwhile, my parents completely overlooked my birthday. I had a store-bought cake and a quiet family dinner. Even though I tried to brush it off as just another instance of me being overdramatic, it set the tone for how I would be treated in comparison to Kate for the rest of my childhood. The favoritism didn't stop with birthday parties. It extended into every aspect of our lives. Kate was always given the newest toys, the best clothes, and the majority of my parents' attention. As a child, I never understood why I couldn't have the same things. I worked hard, saved up my allowance, and bought myself a bike at 10 years old. But when Kate saw it, she threw a tantrum until my parents took me to get her an even nicer one. This was just one of many examples where I learned that my needs and desires simply didn't matter. The message was clear. Kate came first, and I was just a secondary consideration. When it came to academics, the disparity was even more glaring. I joined every club, worked hard, and excelled in my studies. But no matter what I achieved, Kate's successes were always celebrated more. She could get a B+, and my parents would throw her a party. I would get straight A's, and all I received was a simple acknowledgement that it was expected of me. It became clear that no matter what I did, it was never enough. My self-esteem began to plummet as I realized that I was constantly being measured against someone who was always going to come out ahead. When it came to friendships and relationships, things got even worse. I remember trying to make friends at school, but my parents would always accuse me of hanging out with the wrong crowd. They would justify their concern by pointing out how much better Kate's social life was. When I finally started dating in high school, things only escalated. My boyfriend tried to remain respectful when my sister flirted with him, but she quickly accused him of trying to make advances toward her. My parents, of course, believed her. This pattern of her lying and manipulating situations to make me look bad continued throughout our lives. It felt like every relationship I had, whether with friends or romantic partners, was tainted by her accusations and my parents' blind loyalty to her. As I got older, the emotional toll became more evident. I struggled with anxiety, depression, and feelings of isolation. My parents had always told me that family should come first, but when I needed them, they were always too preoccupied with Kate's needs to care about mine. I was expected to support her in every way, from helping her babysit her kids to handling any other issues she created in her life. Even though I had my own career to manage, my parents acted like it was my responsibility to prioritize Kate and her family. When I finally got a job offer that involved more hours and travel, my mom's first concern was, "But who will help Kate with the kids?" It wasn't until I started planning my wedding that I realized just how far they would go to make everything about Kate. When I announced my wedding plans, my parents insisted that Kate walk down the aisle first. They said it was only fair since she was older. This wasn't just about a wedding tradition. It was another attempt to make the day about Kate rather than me. It was the final straw. After years of feeling undervalued and unimportant, I knew I had to take a stand. With the help of my husband, we devised a plan. Instead of letting my parents dictate how my wedding would go, we decided to take control. We secretly hired security to make sure that Kate wouldn't be allowed to walk down the aisle first. When the day arrived, my parents were shocked when Kate was stopped at the door. It wasn't just a simple snub. It was a moment of liberation for me. For once in my life, I wasn't going to let my parents' favoritism ruin something that was supposed to be about me. The wedding was everything I had dreamed of. My parents tried to interfere and manipulate the situation, but they were left with nothing but embarrassment. The irony wasn't lost on me. After years of being pushed aside and dismissed, I was finally able to reclaim my own happiness. It was my moment to shine, and I wasn't going to let anyone take it away from me, especially not Kate or my parents. Looking back, I realize how much damage years of favoritism and emotional neglect have caused. But I also know that standing up for myself in that moment was the beginning of a new chapter. I no longer let my family define who I am or what I deserve. I've started building a life where my needs matter, where my accomplishments are celebrated, and where I can finally feel like I'm worthy of love and respect on my own terms. Growing up, I was always the second choice in my family. My older sister, Kate, was the golden child. Everything in my house revolved around her, from my parents' attention to the way they measured success. Kate's achievements were always in the spotlight, while mine were dismissed or ignored. Over the years, this unequal treatment built up a deep sense of resentment, and as I grew older, I began to realize how emotionally neglectful my parents had been. But it wasn't until my wedding day that I truly understood just how far they would go to make everything about Kate. My sister's behavior wasn't just about sibling rivalry. It was about manipulation, control, and my parents' constant favoritism towards her. From a young age, I was always compared to Kate. If she accused me of something, they believed her, no questions asked. If I did something wrong, no matter how small, I was the one who was punished. This type of treatment became my reality. I learned to accept it even though it hurt. Birthdays, holidays, and special moments that were supposed to be about me always turned into another excuse for my parents to dote on Kate. My parents often dismissed my achievements. When I was in middle school, I won a local art competition, but instead of celebrating my success, they spent the day bragging about Kate's school play, where she had a small part. High school was no different. I worked tirelessly to get good grades, joined clubs, and even excelled at sports. But no matter how hard I tried, Kate's accomplishments were always put first. She was the one who went on family vacations, had her own car, and received all the financial support for her college education. Meanwhile, I was left to figure out my own finances and study on my own. Kate's life was easy in comparison. She never had to worry about the same struggles I did. And my parents were always there to pick up the pieces whenever she made mistakes. I, on the other hand, was always left to fend for myself. There were so many times when I wished they would just acknowledge me, even for something as simple as making it through a hard week or achieving something on my own. But that never came. Instead, my achievements were downplayed, and I learned to keep my victories to myself. It wasn't until I started dating that things really began to unravel. My parents' favoritism became more blatant and hurtful. I had a boyfriend in high school, and my sister made it her mission to flirt with him. She wore revealing outfits and flirted with him right in front of me. When I confronted her, she turned the situation around and told my parents that I was being jealous and insecure. Of course, they sided with her, believing her over me. This pattern of manipulation continued into adulthood. Every time I tried to stand up for myself, my parents would brush me off, claiming that I was the problem, not Kate. When it came time for me to get married, I was determined to make my wedding day about me for once. But of course my parents had other plans. They insisted that Kate walk down the aisle before me, claiming that it was only fair since she was older. They even suggested that my sister should have a similar wedding experience, including the cake and dress, as if they wanted to take away my special day and give it to her. This was the final straw. After years of being treated as less than, I knew I couldn't let them do this to me. With the help of my husband, we came up with a plan. Instead of letting my parents manipulate me into letting Kate walk down the aisle first, we decided to hire security for the wedding. We made sure that Kate wouldn't be allowed to enter the venue or participate in the ceremony. When the day arrived, my parents were stunned when they realized Kate wasn't allowed in. The look on their faces was priceless. After years of manipulating me, they finally understood what it felt like to be the victim of their favoritism. But the drama didn't end there. My sister tried to make a scene, but security was firm. She cried, screamed, and tried to get my parents to back her up, but by then it was too late. My parents were left to deal with the fallout, while I got to enjoy my wedding day without them ruining it. It was a victory for me, a moment where I took back control of my life and stood up for myself. For the first time, I was able to say no to them and not feel guilty. The aftermath of the wedding was a whirlwind. My parents tried to make me feel guilty, accusing me of ruining the family and turning everyone against them. But I didn't back down. I refused to accept their manipulative behavior and continued to live my life on my own terms. My sister, who had always been the darling of the family, was left to deal with the fallout of her own actions. And as for my parents, they had no choice but to accept that I was no longer willing to let them control me. Now looking back, I can see how far I've come. I no longer feel like I have to compete for my parents' love or attention. I've learned to set boundaries and demand the respect I deserve. And while the family drama continues, I've found peace in knowing that I have the power to create the life I want, free from their toxic influence. The story of overcoming years of emotional manipulation and favoritism offers valuable life lessons that can resonate with individuals of all ages, particularly those in their later years. It teaches the importance of self-worth, setting boundaries, and standing up for one's own happiness, even in the face of family pressure. Many of us, especially as we grow older, may carry emotional baggage from years of neglect or feeling overlooked, whether within our families or in other aspects of life. This story emphasizes that it is never too late to reclaim your sense of self and prioritize your well-being. It's essential to recognize the value of your own life experiences, achievements, and personal happiness, independent of the approval or expectations of others. Setting healthy boundaries and learning to say no can bring a sense of peace, allowing you to focus on what truly matters: your own happiness, relationships, and inner peace. For older adults who may have spent years trying to meet the needs of others, this story is a reminder that self-care is not selfish, but necessary for emotional health. It encourages us to reflect on our past, acknowledge the areas where we were neglected or mistreated, and begin to heal by taking control of the present and future, ensuring that we live the remainder of our lives with dignity, respect, and self-compassion. Thank you for watching this intense Reddit family story on Silent Wars. We hope it gave you a glimpse into the powerful emotions that can arise from family dynamics. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more gripping Reddit family stories. Your support means the world to us. Stay tuned for more captivating content coming your way soon. See you in the next video.